All right, what's up, guys? You're listening to a May 19th edition of the Splash Eye podcast. Today, I am joined by a regular, Sid. How you doing, man?
Pretty good, man. How are you?
Just finished Last Dance, chilling, just kind of getting by. I haven't, unlike you, I'm not working on the daily, so trying to figure out ways to make time go by. But can't complain.
Yeah, I hear you. Yeah, just this is already I think week 9 of working from home for me. So at this point, it's become the routine.
Yeah,
How much else? Obviously, Last Dance was a nice way of nice thing to look forward to sports wise for the last 5 weeks. So
yeah.
that was enjoyable.
Yeah, I'm about to get to the Last Dance. I obviously there's a decent amount we could talk about, but before that, it was recently brought to my attention that had things been normal, the conference final should have started today, yesterday, ballpark. So it's just kind of
Right.
crazy thinking. If we think about this in terms of our sports calendar, it was like we've been, quarantined basically for the last month of the regular season and then the first two rounds of the playoffs. Obviously, you throw March Madness in there, so it's just kind of crazy.
Right.
It's going by. Hopefully, everybody's staying healthy and staying safe. But yeah, it's going by.
Yeah, that's a lot of sports from a timeline standpoint that this quarantine has been going on for. But yeah, so of course the most important thing is hopefully everyone is safe and doing the right thing of keeping their distance, taking all precautions, and hopefully sooner rather than later we'll get to see some sports again.
Yeah, for sure. Now, before we talk some Last Dance, I was actually, just kind of seeing some of the news with regards to the NBA. It seems like Adam Silver is thinking that within the next 2 to 4 weeks, he can come up with a more firm decision on whether or not they're going to resume the season, and if so, how are they going to do so and try to minimize the risk of spreading the virus. I'm curious, based on what you've seen or just based on how you feel, and you don't need to get necessarily too, I don't know, political, so to speak, or just too, you know you don't need to necessarily put on your economist hat, doctor hat, whatever the case may be. But I'm just curious, like, if you're Adam Silver, or I guess, which do you think that I guess I'm just curious for you what your gauge is on the decision that Adam Silver has to make here.
Yeah, I can't imagine what it must be like. I know he's feeling a lot of pressure from the owners and the players, especially with that conference call and from all the superstar players, where they're really trying to this happen, where they resume the NBA season. There's the playoffs still happen. Still have a 2020 NBA champion, so I'm sure he's really thinking about everything or whatever way it's possible to make that happen, and any measures as far as the getting like all the doctors and taking all the precautions and tests and everything. I don't quite know what the best method of protocol for that is,
Sure.
uh, but I do think that Adam Silver, that he has to consider all options and what would be the best way, and then of course he still has to consider the medical opinions of, is even if he can come up with the most safest way of doing this, is it still how much of a risk is it, I guess.
Sure.
So obviously, like at this point, the whole fans and travel, that stuff that's out of the question. I think really the the main option is to have a neutral location, and they're all the playoff teams, I guess, are will be around in a sort of college campus type feel, and they try to make the games happen, and then
each team takes a great precaution as far as making sure each day that everyone is good, taking their temperature, testing them, however approach they need to take. They'll have to do that each day and closely monitor all the players. So I think Mark Cuban made a good point about, basketball teams. It's like 15 players per team. So it's not too many people you have to monitor versus, say, a baseball team or an NFL football team. So, yeah, like all I can say is it doesn't surprise me that it's taking Adam Silver needs some time, to really consider everything. I'm not even though I think we're all just, we so badly want to know if it's going to happen or not. I can understand why it's taking some time for a decision to be made. So obviously, as an NBA fan, we would love to see some hoops, but of course you would want there to be a way that everyone is still staying safe.
Yeah, absolutely. And like you've alluded to, there's obviously a lot of components to the decision Adam Silver has to make here. Some of it's obviously going to be determined or influenced by the results of some of the states that are trying to reopen up. And, even if he can come up with a safe method, I've heard this idea of like having like a bubble or like a campus, like you said, at a neutral location. Even if that is the case, he still also has to think about the PR, in that it's a pretty bad look for the NBA if they're hogging, millions, not millions, but a bunch of tests when, regular everyday Americans, or some of them, are struggling to get tests. So I feel like, even if he can pull it off, he also wants to think like, does this damage our credibility as a league? Or maybe does he look at it from the perspective of, hey, sports right now could be a good way to kind of unite people and encourage people to actually maybe stay home, whatever the case may be. So I definitely don't envy the position that Adam Silver is in terms of making this decision. But if there's anybody that I trust with making it, it is Adam Silver.
Yeah, I agree, and that's a great point you brought up about all the tests, and certain people aren't able to get to be tested, and I guess that's something that gets overlooked is, if you do dedicate so many the doctors to testing and monitoring these players, that there's the whole opportunity cost point of view of it might take away from of course, the rest of the general, world of people who are, of course, also trying to, stay safe from the coronavirus. So, that's a good way to look at it. So I'm sure Adam Silver has to consider all these different components. So, yeah, I don't envy him either. But and I know he's someone who does genuinely care about people and humanity. So, I do think that he will make before he makes a decision, he will consider all facets that'll go into it.
Yeah. And then last point on this. Well, one question for you and one point that I just found kind of funny. You alluded earlier to a call amongst a bunch of superstars. I found it hilarious that it seemed like Chris Paul, as the, I believe, president or the VP of the Players Association, he organized the call. And I just found it so funny that he organizes this call, and James Harden is a notable superstar who was not on the call. But but my question to you actually is, let's say the NBA does come back and it is kind of in obviously an unconventional manner with regards to obviously an incomplete season, neutral location, no fans, and then maybe testing and potentially players having to sit games because they test positive. I'm curious, right. Do you feel like you would look, and this is something that I've seen discussed, do you feel like you would look at this year's champion and not necessarily say that they aren't champions, but maybe feel like, oh, that was a weird year, kind of like with a little asterisk next to it. I'm curious for your take on just, crowning a champion in these very strange, in this very, unprecedented situation.
Yeah, I definitely see the asterisk point of view. I mean, this is, no matter how you try to break it down, it's going to be a weird set of circumstances. It's a weird playoffs, just something unusual from what we were used to, and there's a lot of extracurricular, like there's a lot of extra factors that and like you said, if a player tests positive, they're going to be out for 2 weeks. So in a way, you can look at it like, they're injured. Injuries are part of the game, so they miss some time. But then again, how is this gonna? Because if a player say gets sick, you never know if some of his teammates might have symptoms, and so that might affect an entire team's performance. So there's all kinds of narratives that that could potentially come up when it's all said and done. When say there's a champion, and then then there's then some people start to say, oh, but this team, like they had this player who might be like one of the superstar players, right? They tested positive, and if this didn't happen, then they would have won it all. Like that might be a discussion, as like I'm foreshadowing if they go through with this and have this season happens. So I can definitely see that happening, but it sounds like regardless, the players and the owners, for them, it doesn't really matter. Like they will gladly still take the championship ring, having a Larry O'Brien trophy. So, and they're the ones who are going out there. They're putting all their time, their energy, their sweat into this. So if they want to make it happen, I mean, it's you still hope for their sake. You hope it happens.
Yeah, definitely. I feel like regardless of what happens, even if the season gets canceled or season resumes, I think just bigger picture in the history books, obviously there's going to be an asterisk regardless of what you're looking at, whether it's from everything from like a company's performance to I'm just giving examples, but things like that, to obviously like the NCAA tournament, those archives and whatnot. So it just seems like regardless of what it is we do, there's always going to be like like a little star next to this time period, and for obvious reasons. But moving on to kind of what's been captive, or what a lot of sports fans have been looking forward to the last couple weeks. You and I both were able to check out The Last Dance. I'm curious. We've talked a lot after each episode, but I'm curious what actually really kind of surprised you, or maybe captivated you the most.
So I think what really captivated me was the fact that Michael Jordan, he and the Bulls, their first repeat which was 90, 91, 92, 93. And of course he ended up retiring and playing baseball. And what really captivated me was the fact that, well, one, obviously that's his father being murdered. That's definitely like very, very devastating. And, you feel for Michael Jordan and his family for dealing with that. But then you consider the fact that he was already thinking about playing baseball, which is a sport that he dreamed of playing since he was a kid. And his father actually wanted him to be a baseball player. And then the last conversation he had with his father was considering the option of retiring from playing basketball and playing baseball. And of course, his father was murdered, and so that ended up being the last conversation. And I think when you consider that, and you consider like that that kind of drove him to go play baseball, and he also felt that that chapter of his life playing basketball, like without his dad, he feels like he needs to take it, move on to a different chapter of his life. And I don't know, that just kind of moved me, because I didn't really know and consider all these facts about Michael Jordan's story. So I can't blame him, and that I can understand why he made that decision. So I know that gets talked about a lot with him playing baseball. Like, oh, if he didn't go play baseball, he could have had 8 championships, whatnot. But when you consider the human aspect and like in his story, it makes sense as to why he made that decision.
Yeah, I was obviously I had known that Michael Jordan had played baseball, and I knew that his father was one of the reasons why. Obviously, I didn't know that the last conversation he had with his father was about playing baseball. And what I actually hadn't realized was that kind of the summer of '93, or like that '92-'93 season, the last of the first three-peat, he kind of was kind of wearing down and kind of just bored, so to speak. Like he felt like he had kind of eclipsed or kind of accomplished what he had sought out to accomplish. And those, the three-peat, playing on the dream team, all of that had really taken a toll on him. And then obviously you throw in the very tragic passing of his father. And so it kind of makes a lot more sense, I guess, like you said, when you think about the very human component, it makes a lot more sense why he decided to walk away. And I also think it definitely makes, I think, the adding more credibility to that, and then also kind of, I like how they shed light on the fact that it didn't make a lot of, there were obviously conspiracy theories about David Stern suspending him for gambling, but I like how the doc pointed out that doesn't make any sense, because David Stern is someone who was literally the first thing on his mind was how do I grow this cash cow that I have. So it makes sense when you factor in that it doesn't make sense for Stern to suspend him, and obviously everything that we just outlined. I think that it makes you realize that kind of helps you better understand that the decision in 1993.
Oh yeah, absolutely. And I hope that conspiracy has been completely shot down, because that sounds pretty ridiculous. And like you said, I mean, it's for David Stern. I mean, having Michael Jordan in the league is, you absolutely want to capitalize on that, and I'm sure it drove up all the amount of fans and spectators for the game. So yeah, I don't think it makes any sense. And then of course all the reasons that were outlined, that just made it even more reasonable. So yeah, I don't think there's really any merit to that conspiracy theory.
Yeah. Speaking of conspiracy theories, though, one thing that did raise some eyebrows for me, the more I kind of thought about it, or the more I had to just kind of sit back and think on, was the flu game. So I'm curious. Obviously, they kind of outlined that it wasn't actually the flu and that it was food poisoning and whatnot. I'm curious for how you felt about the story and whatnot, because I have some thoughts.
Ooh. Yeah, no, I like, that was of course a surprise for me, because I knew it was the flu game, and I knew that it happened, but I had no idea that about him ordering a pizza the night before, and they believe that was what caused him. Well, of course it was food poisoning, so it seems like that was the cause. And then of course, because he's on the road in Utah, and they said there was 5 people delivering it, they felt that there was something fishy about it. So I had no idea about that. So that did kind of blow my mind and make me think, like, wow. So like, I guess there is this notion that when you're on the road, you're playing in the finals, maybe got to be careful if you're a superstar player and going out ordering
Yeah.
food. But yeah, yeah, that's crazy. Um, I I like, it's also, to think, so I've never had food poisoning before, but I know that, like, it's I know that that's got to feel terrible, and to actually go out there and play the game and be able to still put on a performance like that, I mean, that's incredible.
Yeah. Uh, so now, granted, this actually was not in the doc. This was an article I actually saw today. So some man in Utah, specifically Park City, Utah, claims that he actually was the guy who made the pizza. And I assume that this was published by, I think, NBC Sports. So I would assume that they've done their research, and it's not just some random dude trying to take credit. And what he actually said that was really interesting to me was that he actually said that he was a Bulls fan, and that he gets the call, realizes that the pizza delivery is being sent to the Bulls hotel room, right? So he figures it's one of the Bulls players. And he said that he got a lot of crap at work for being the one Bulls fan amongst a bunch of Jazz fans, right? So he said that he actually told his coworkers, hey, I'm making this myself to make sure that no one did anything suspicious. So I found that incredibly interesting, as point one. The second point actually is that the Pizza Hut closed at 11 p.m. that day, and he said that the call for MJ's Pizza comes in at 10:30, and so I think that, and so the pizza arrives, let's say ballpark 10:45, 11 p.m. ish, and he eats the whole thing.
Yeah.
That potentially could put to rest some of the theories. There's obviously some other conspiracy theories that maybe he was hungover. Um, I think that could potentially decrease the chances that was the case. But then this guy says that he didn't try to contaminate the pizza, but obviously Michael Jordan's trainer is very convinced of that, and I think he has very valid reason to feel that way. So it's interesting to me. Was it to me, it's like I'm wondering. First off, is it possible that did he just get food poisoning from something else, and that he just happened to have pizza that probably didn't make it any better? I don't know. Was he really just sick? Is this whole pizza thing just trying to add a little extra dramatic narrative? I don't know. But that was definitely one of the. Obviously, it's nothing super basketball related, but it is interesting because that's obviously one of the iconic moments when we think about his title runs. So I just find it interesting. Like, I actually walked away from this after watching the section they had on the flu game. I actually walked away with more questions and eyebrows raised than before. Before, I just kind of assumed, oh, okay, he was sick with the flu, kind of persisted through it, ends up winning the game. But it's interesting. I actually have more questions than answers now.
Yeah, no, yeah, it makes sense. I mean, I didn't really think read into all these facts about the people who delivered the pizza and the guy who's a Bulls fan who insisted that he would take care of it. But that definitely makes it a lot more interesting. You wonder how that would have gone down. Like, did those other Jazz fan coworkers, did they still try to sabotage? I mean, I'm sure there's that conspiracy theory. But one fact that does really jump out at me was the fact that it was 5 of them that showed up, and typically, I mean, every single time I've gotten pizza delivered, it was always one guy. So that does kind of make it sound a bit more specific. Suspicious.
Suspicious, yeah.
Yeah, I don't know what the protocol is for going. Maybe back then, going late at night to a Bulls hotel room. Maybe there was a different protocol. I don't know, but I still don't think that would require 5 people. So
yeah,
that definitely does. Yeah,
that definitely would raise eyebrows. for obvious reasons. I wonder if maybe that was just a thing of like they realized who it was going to, and they wanted to see if they could, say hi. But
Sure. Yeah.
but I definitely understand why his trainer felt that way, like felt suspicious with the presence of 5 people.
Yeah.
But that was just I don't know, that was just a little. That was one of the more fun but interesting things that definitely caught my attention. Um, more, kind of to transition more into basketball specific stuff. Obviously, you and I, we didn't watch basketball during this time period when he was playing, because you were super young. I actually wasn't even born until after the second three-peat. But I'm curious, what from whether it's personnel or specific player, what really surprised you from just a basketball, whether it's the management, coaching, or X's and O's standpoint.
Well, definitely the management aspect did surprise me. Just the whole dynamic with the owner and Kraus and Phil Jackson, and like just it seemed like there was friction even when they were winning. There was friction, and of course like the whole like title of Last Dance. It comes from the fact that they pretty much knew from 97 to 98 season that like that was going to be it, like for Phil and MJ and that Bulls team together. And we did end up finding out later, like in the last episode, that like the owner was really he still wanted Phil Jackson to return after all that, but he didn't feel like bringing back the same core was the right move financially. So that definitely that surprised me, considering how much success that they had. And I mean it's MJ, it's Pippen, Rodman, Curtis. That's quite the core that they had. So that was surprising to me. From an X's and O's standpoint, it was cool to see the whole like trajectory. Going back to when MJ was young and Doug Collins was his coach, and so how he used to get the ball a lot more in that offense. It was like everyone move out of the way. Michael Jordan's getting the ball, and then Phil Jackson kind of came up, and there was the triangle offense, which is still a very famous style of offense today. So, and how that sort of played out. And then we even saw Dennis Rodman, how he kind of broke down the triangle offense, and when he while watching film. And I think we obviously got a lot of we definitely saw like Dennis Rodman, the full Dennis Rodman, like all what he was about and his off-court stuff. But I think how he was as a basketball player, his basketball IQ, that was also displayed on this documentary. And I don't think a lot of people, including myself, really knew much about that. He's hard. He's a guy who's going to do a lot of dirty work, but I didn't think too much about the basketball IQ aspect of it, and I never really had the chance to really watch too much of him or watch interviews or things like that. But I think this documentary kind of showed that too.
Yeah, it definitely showed. I think the easy perception is just that he was this athletic animal who just played really hard, which definitely was the case. But it was cool because of obviously a lot of the off-court stuff. You kind of assume that he just is this dude who nonchalantly just pulls up and then just shows up to play. But it definitely was really cool to see him sit down and kind of break down how exactly he approached, positioning, analyze, kind of trying to figure out, shot tendencies and whatnot, so that he could position himself to be prime in prime position to either get a rebound or tip it out and things like that. So he's definitely a very high IQ guy. That definitely stood out to me as well. So It definitely was glad to see both the off-court stuff because that was fairly entertaining, but also hear him kind of discuss his role both on the Bad Boys and the second MJ three-peat.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, that is a crazy story when you think about, you know, what the Bad Boy Pistons and how they were such a barrier for MJ, and he says he hates them to this day. And funny enough, Dennis Rodman was a part of them, and then, like, you know, now they're teammates and they're going to war together for the second three-peat. So
Yeah.
that's an interesting storyline.
Yeah. And, and so obviously, you know, when you have two three-peats with, you know, obviously with the 2-year hiatus, so to speak, that's obviously going to constitute a dynasty. And you and I have been fortunate to see. I would say that the only two dynasties that you and I have really been able to see are the Heatles and then the Warriors. I'm curious, would you consider the Celtics Big Three a quote unquote dynasty?
I do not, just simply because they only won one championship. So I feel like, you know, if you're a dynasty, I would say multiple championships and is definitely something that is a requirement. And I know the Celtics made 2 finals, but yeah, I just think, you know, usually dynasties consist of a multi-time champion. I also think, I know the Warriors dynasty was also technically, if we're thinking like 2015 to 2019, that's 4 years. I mean, the Celtics didn't. I feel like they were also kind of short-lived. I mean, they did get together, but it was also like in the tail end of their careers, like, referring to Paul Pierce, Kevin Garnett, Ray Allen. So that was about a 4 or 5 year run. They won one championship. So, yeah, that doesn't sound like a dynasty to me.
Yeah, I'd probably have to agree. I would say that the second Lakers, like the last of the 2008 to, or I guess 07 to 10 Lakers, probably have more of a. I mean, they meet your criteria of multiple titles and obviously 3 straight finals, although it was a little shorter, so to speak. Like it's only a 3-year stretch. I guess 4 years where they're, you know, a top 1 or 2 seed. But this is, once again, this is obviously just kind of nuance about how you define dynasty. But would you consider a team like the early 2000s Pistons, where they make, I think it's 6 straight conference finals from 2003 to 2008? They go to every conference finals and then they go 1-1 in the finals. Do you consider that dynasty?
Ooh, that's a good question. That they are probably what I'd consider an honorable mention, you know, because they, you know, going to the Eastern Conference Finals that many times in a row is impressive. And to have won a championship, to have gone to multiple finals, it puts them right on the cusp of it. Like, I think if they, again, like I said, you know, I think a multi-time champion is part of the requirement. So I think that in a way is probably the one thing that holds them back. Like, you know, if like hypothetically they won in like 06 or something like that, or 05 or 06, then they would honestly, then I think there would be a dynasty. But yeah, they're about as close as it gets. But yeah, there's a lot of teams that, you know, they made multiple runs. I mean, as a Mavs fan, like the Mavs didn't go to like multiple conference finals in a row, but they did have like 11 years of like 50+ winning seasons, going to the playoffs. They did get one championship, just like the Pistons, just like the Celtics. They went to multiple finals during that run. So there's a lot of teams that they had these like these stretches of excellence, but then I think the dynasty is something very specific, and there's a strict criteria. So I would say the Pistons kind of they also miss out on a dynasty.
Sure. Yeah, I guess to just kind of add on to that, I would definitely agree with you. I think to me, multiple titles is probably one of the criteria, but to me, another thing that I think I would personally gauge, and this is something it's hard to quantify necessarily, but essentially, when there's kind of there's a stretch of multiple years where said team is considered the best team in the league or the team that everybody's got to go through. So usually, eh, in that case, I guess the Lakers, like from you could fall in that criteria, but I think the Heatles definitely comes to mind because 2012 they were favored in most of the finals they played in, and then in 2012 and 13 they obviously go back to back, but in 2012 to 2013 they obviously had the famous streak, and that was when like it seemed like everyone in the league was like I wouldn't say in awe, but everybody definitely was like, okay, if we want to beat Miami, like we have to have our A plus 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 game. You know what I mean? And then very similar deal with Golden State when they went 73-9, or when they were just steamrolling everybody in the playoffs in 2017. I feel like those stretches really define that you are heads and shoulders above everybody else in the league, and I think that to me is like one of the defining traits of what a quote unquote dynasty. I'm curious for what you think.
Yeah, that's a good point. I mean, I can't disagree with that. Like you're right that Golden State, they were of course just absolutely just destroying their competition at one point, and I mean they had the record for most regular season wins, and then like you said, the Heat, they had that long streak, um and it did seem they seemed pretty immortal for some time, even though the Spurs came so close. That's just more of a testament to the Spurs' greatness. So, yeah, that is part of the feel of a dynasty. Um, Actually, which that leads me to ask you, what do you think of? Do you think the Spurs are a dynasty? And if so, like, do you think like their dynasty is like a 12, 13 year dynasty because they or actually 15 years because they won it in 99 and then they won it, the last one was 2014.
Yeah.
So
Yeah, and to add to that, I mean, even though their titles were 15 years apart, like the Spurs they were the second best team in the league in 2016. They I think they went
mhm.
67-15 in the same year where the Warriors went 73-9. But to answer your
Yeah.
question, I mean that's tough. At this point, it's just it's like labeling apples and oranges, right? Like at the end of the day, whether or not I consider the Spurs a dynasty doesn't take away from the fact that they were a great team. The one thing I will
Mhm.
say about the Spurs is obviously they they have the consistent they had the consistent coach and superstar tandem of Pop and Tim Duncan, and then obviously for the last four titles they have Tony Parker and Manu Ginobili. So there is that core of a dynasty, so to speak. But I guess the thing for me, I look at that as more of them being I don't know. It's like I said, this is kind of just nuance of how you define it. But to me, there was never a period where I was like, they never as a fan of someone who rooted against the Spurs, they never quite had that same like intimidation factor, so to speak, of dominance as a team like Golden State or even the Heatles did. But what I can say is that when you are that consistently good for so long, like that should say something. So that's my immediate answer is no. But that said, that doesn't take away the fact that they were consistently great and usually in the picture, with the exception of like 2009 and 2010. They were like always in the picture for quite some time. They were always in the picture for the title race.
Oh yeah, for sure. And yeah, I guess they're. I know I just said earlier that the Pistons were as close as it gets. Actually, I mean, you can say the Spurs are as close as it gets. Um,
Yeah,
I mean, they did get three titles in a span of 5 years.
that
So like
that is
03,
true.
05.
You know
So
what?
they didn't.
Yeah,
So
yeah. you know what? When you bring that up, the 3 and 5 years, that does make me pause and say, you know what? You probably have to give it to them.
Yeah.
You would probably have to say that because, I mean, Golden State had 3 and 5 years. Granted, their 3 and 5 years was a little more impressive because it was 5 straight finals, and one of the finals they lost, it was like literally the closest. They were so close to having the greatest season ever. And then the other finals they lost was this past year when they were like still respectable and close despite not having KD and then also losing Clay at the end of Game 6. So,
Yeah.
yeah. So like, yeah. I mean, when you frame it that way, like, you got it. I guess I would say that, but the reason why maybe it didn't register with me as much initially is because I feel like there's been different evolutions of the Spurs, like the '99 team, Twin Towers. 2003, it's like it's Robinson's last year, and Tony Parker's kind of coming into his own. '05, it's like Manu, Tim, Tony, they got this on lock. Same deal with '07. 2013 is kind of like a weird year. Not a weird year, but it's kind of a year where I really felt like it really was like a equal opportunity. Like it didn't feel like there was any super duper star, but all of them were just so solid. Kawhi was still figuring it out. And then 2014, it's Kawhi kind of coming into his own, but he wasn't even an all-star that year, but they were still kind of growing, and he was growing, and they kind of were coming into their own. And then 2016 is like Kawhi superstar. That was the year Kawhi was an all-star, second in MVP voting. Same deal with 2017. So, like I said, the reason why maybe it doesn't register with me as much is because when I think Dynasty, I always think of like a single identity. So it's like the Heatles. Okay, that's LeBron, prime LeBron, unguardable in the post, crazy efficient. Dwayne Wade as the second guy, but then Chris Bosh doing a lot of the dirty work. And then you got role players that fit right in, like Mike Miller, Ray Allen, and Chris Anderson. Mario Chalmers, right? And then I think Shaq and Kobe, Lakers. Okay, that's pretty easy. Shaq and Kobe. That's and then the Warriors. It's like Steph, Clay, Draymond. Plug in KD, boom. So I guess maybe that's why the Spurs don't quite resonate as much. But when you think about it, it's like, you know what? 3 and 5 years plus the titles in 3 different decades and the model of consistency. You gotta give it to them.
Yeah, for sure. I definitely agree with everything you said, and yeah, I mean, to your point about the evolution of the Spurs and their model of consistency, I mean, that's impressive in its own way, and I almost feel like that almost distracts us from the whole dynasty argument, because, like you said, with like all these dynasties, we remember these. There's an identity that's associated with the kind of team, even like say the entire roster, from like the superstars to the role players, and with the Spurs, there was such a long evolution that it's kind of like when you think of the Spurs, you're like you think which Spurs, because they've been so great for so long.
Yep.
There's like multiple versions of them. So yeah, that's a good point. And I guess like if you were to label them the dynasty, I guess you go with the mid 2000s, because that's when they got the 3 and 5 years, and that was also, I mean, and sandwiched in between, like 04 was the series when they played the Lakers, and Derek Fisher hit that incredible turnaround shot with 0.4 seconds to go, and so that kind of, I know that didn't end the series, but that put the Lakers ahead, and then they ended up closing it out. And then 06 was when, of course, the Mavs beat the Spurs in Game 7, and I'm sure if you're the Spurs, you feel like they could have gotten past the Mavs, maybe they're the champions in 06. So, because I think that was the year, like, even though the Mavs were the 4th seed, that's when the seeding was they used to have division winners, but the Mavs were still at second best record in the NBA at 60 wins, I think. So it really was like the Spurs Mavs was kind of like 1 and 2 playing each other, even though in the second round. So
yeah. Thank God they got rid of the division rule with seeding.
Yeah, that was. Yeah, I think that was like the best example of why that just
that doesn't work.
Yeah.
So yeah, but yeah, I mean the Spurs, they definitely, I mean they were always in it. It's like with exception to '09 and 2010. So yeah, they're definitely a unique team. But yeah, I'm sure there'll be a documentary on them, as well as Kobe, Shaq, Lakers, and then eventually the Heatles and the Golden State Warriors. So
Yeah.
I guess the Last Dance, as it was a great, very, very well done, and now I think it's made all of us fans excited about the next
The
ones.
next big one that they do. Yeah, absolutely. Real quick thought that I had, I'm curious to run this by you. I saw quite a few parallels between how the Bulls dynasty was built as well as how the Warriors dynasty was built. And then I thought about bigger picture. It seems as though, with the exception of the Heatles, maybe, with the exception of the Heatles, because they were primarily built through free agency, it seems as though the method, the process of building a dynasty, it's you got to hit on the draft multiple years. You gotta find a couple. Either you gotta really nail those super duper stars that you take really early, or you gotta nail a couple diamonds in the rough that are later picks that ends up becoming key cogs for you. That's the first thing. You gotta have the right coach to kind of groom that talent and kind of develop them as NBA players, develop their confidence, etc. So what I'm thinking is, I saw a couple parallels. Doug Collins was kind of like the Mark Jackson, and then Phil Jackson was kind of the Steve Kerr, if I could kind of draw that parallel. And then with that in mind, then it's meant once you have a couple of, superstars, Michael and Scotty versus Steph, Clay, and then I guess Draymond kind of, though he also does have more of the role player hat. You got to find the right pieces to surround them. You might be able to sign a free agent or two. In the Warriors' case, they got to have a mega free agent. In the Bulls' case, it was more so that they made a couple savvy trades and then also had some solid free agent additions that were, more role players. But so I guess I say all that to say, it seems like, with the exception of the Heat, it seems like the formula really is like, it does seem like there is kind of a trend. Like, you could even argue there was the same trend for the Shaq and Kobe Lakers. You got to draft a superstar. They draft Kobe. They have some solid role players, but they also spent the free agent money wisely and got Shaq. They underachieved for a couple years, and then, but they were good, but they just weren't getting far they weren't getting to the finals. I think it was Del Harris, and then finally they swapped Del Harris for Phil Jackson, and then that coaching swap is kind of what takes them to the next level, along with internal development or internal improvement. So I'm just curious, like, do you think there's a step or maybe something I'm forgetting to mention, or do you think that maybe this is just? I'm just curious for your thoughts on kind of a lot of what I just outlined.
Oh yeah, I mean, it's all great points, and yeah, I think the draft is very critical, and if you can find a couple of diamonds in the rough and just make you strike gold with a few picks, that's huge, and like NBA's got a salary cap, and so yes, you can go try to get the big fish in free agency, and there are plenty of teams that have tried to do that, and the Heat, of course, they did strike big, so for their method worked too, but with taking the salary cap into consideration, if you can get some gems in the draft, you're not really, that's not taking as much space from salary cap point of view, so you actually do have room to add even more help, like maybe like for the Warriors case, they could add an Andre Iguodala, and they could pay and gave him some wiggle room. They could pay Steph Curry later and Klay Thompson, so and Draymond Green, and I know at some point it becomes tricky because you have to pay everybody, but the fact that they were able to draft so well, it gave them some years of being able to kind of fit everybody in. So and make that one extra move that might just propel you to going deep in the playoffs consistently and for winning championships. So, yeah, I mean, like there's a lot of different factors that go in. I think the Bulls kind of did everything too. You know, they did draft really well. They made some big moves in free agency. Did they trade for Dennis Rodman?
Yeah. Yep.
Or did they just sign him? They traded for him. Okay, so yeah, they made a move like that, and then Kukoc. I mean,
That was a
that was
draft pick.
some
That was, yeah.
that was a draft pick. Yeah, and they actually like the Spurs. That was an international draft pick. Like they did some they were scouting someone from Europe, and they found him. They found him from Croatia, and he actually had played the U.S. team in the '92
Yep.
Dream Team. So that was we definitely got a glimpse of that in the Last Dance. But that was another way of like some of the best teams. They're having some great scouts who can find some hidden gems out there, and like I said, the Spurs have had plenty of success with that too.
Yep. Yeah, I definitely agree with what you're saying. I guess the last point I'll make before kind of wrapping things up is that it is important to note, like, well, first off, Miami, because it is, they did have a superstar in place and in Dwayne Wade, and they're also a premier destination with a guy like Pat Riley in the front office. They're one of the few teams that could pull off a free agency heist like that to build a super team. Most other times it's a little more difficult. I feel like most of the times it's through trade, meaning you got to give something up. So that's one thing to keep in mind. And then the second thing is, obviously building these dynastic teams is difficult. Like, we just outlined this process. Philly tried to follow that process, but the problem was they didn't quite hit on their draft picks the way they did. And even the ones they hit on, Joel Embiid and Ben Simmons, they don't quite play as well together as you would like, maybe, which I think is something that maybe we didn't mention, was that in a lot of these dynastic situations, the guys can play together and not necessarily just play together, because Embiid and Simmons can play together, but more so that they can that there's not a what's the right word? They're not potentially there's not a cannibalistic dynamic where sometimes it feels like, Embiid for Embiid to be at his best, Ben's not playing, and then Ben to be at his best, Embiid's not playing. Whereas Kobe, Shaq, they can play together, and they play together a lot. Wade and LeBron and Bosh, and for that matter, Wade's willing to take a back seat to be the second guy. Bosh is willing to do the dirty work. Scottie Pippen and Michael Jordan, obviously. Scottie was more than happy being the Swiss Army knife. And then Clay, talk about a guy who's willing to sacrifice or not, demand too much. Klay Thompson playing next to a guy like Steph. Those two guys never, I feel like they're very malleable. And so that's kind of what allows these dynastic situations to take off. So I say all that to say, teams can tank and hit on their draft picks, but it as this is no surprise to anyone, there's a lot of things that have to be in place for these things to really take off. And that's obviously why we don't see dynastic teams particularly often.
Yeah, no, it makes a lot of sense. And I mean, one very recent example of what you just said is also OKC. I mean, they think about what they have: KD, Russ, and Harden, and only made one final.
Ibaka,
Ibaka too,
as a late first round gem, but
yeah.
So I mean, yeah. Go ahead.
Go ahead. Oh, I think it takes. I mean, the draft is one thing. It's a lot of the decision making you make even past that, and of course also paying guys who you pay, who you make trades for. It's just the culmination of that, and you have to do that for not just 1 or 2 years. You got to do that like 5, 6 straight years. I mean, it's like consistent evolution, but you still how you kind of handle like both the salary cap and also just understanding when you need to put that aside and say, no, we have something special here. We need to stick with this. And I think I mean, that's kind of gotten OKC's way if you think about it, like not wanting to pay Harden and going over the luxury tax. So
Yeah,
yeah,
definitely. Yeah, I'm definitely very curious to see, especially in this day and age where players are moving around all the time. I'm definitely very curious to see what the next dynasty is. You get the sense that it's got to be a team that's homegrown, as in like I've alluded to, a lot of draft picks that you hit on, and then maybe a couple really savvy, smart free agent signings, a couple trades. But yeah, I'm definitely very curious because right now I don't feel like any team yet is a quote unquote dynasty. But very curious to see, the next whenever basketball is back and normal. I'm curious to see to wonder who the team of the 2020s is going to be.
yeah. And who knows? Maybe the Warriors aren't done yet. Maybe this is just
Year
just
off.
one
Yeah.
setback a year. Yeah.
Yeah. That wouldn't surprise me at all.
This might be remembered. Yeah, me neither. This might be remembered as that, like, 2020 will be remembered for a lot of other reasons, but this also might be remembered as like a year, like, as that off year for the Warriors, but then they get back on track and they will have a high draft pick. So if they draft as well as they did, with finding these guys like Steph, Clay, and Draymond, like, who knows?
Yeah. Yeah, definitely. So yeah, we'll see. So with that in mind, we were shooting for about half an hour, but we got closer to an hour. But appreciate you coming on. So once again, thanks for taking the time to chat. And to the listeners, thank you for listening. And if you haven't done so already, please subscribe on whatever platform you're listening to, whether it's Apple Podcasts, Spotify, SoundCloud, or YouTube. And appreciate you listening. And once again, thanks, Sid.
Yeah, thank you so much for having me. This was a lot of fun. And yeah, I know you wanted to keep it to 30 minutes, but I guess there's, talking hoops is too much fun. So
Yeah.
it was great.
Yeah, thanks for coming on, man.
Yeah, thank you.